Hello, this is Jim Schaefer. I'm the executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Randall Baier, and we're going to be talking largely about the impeachment scandal that's still going on. Welcome to Rip Rap.
Glad to be back, Jim.
The thing that I first want to talk about is the Mueller report, which apparently most Americans have not read.
True. It's 500, what is it?
448
pages. I'm supposed to know that.
And I wonder if you had any ideas why people haven't read it. We do in order to prepare for the question, because Mueller is a very careful interrogator and responder.
Right.
But he's going to be in Congress this week, and we're going to interview him about this report. And I guess the hope is that by having him and the Congress people on television, that will help people understand the issue better.
I hope so. You know, it's interesting. It didn't happen like Harry Potter happened. And when Harry Potter came out, it was a race for pretty much every kid or every librarian in the country to read it. I mean, they had races to read the book. You know, who can get it finished? 750 pages. Or Game of Thrones, same reading frenzy.
Well, this represented a 22-month investigation.
Indeed, right.
In this other chapter, by Jack Balkan, he talks about Trump as a symptom of constitutional rot, loss of trust in government and in political opponents. He eventually produces demagogues who attempt to take advantage of the situation.
Right.
Future. Trump represents the end of a cycle of politics rather than the future of politics. American politics is divided into regimes into which one party's agenda tends to dominate. Trump is the last president in the Reagan regime. Here's an interesting chapter with Tyler Coleman. Could fascism come to America? Could it happen here?
Some have already argued that it's here already. But not in the sense of what we saw in Europe, I guess, in the same way. But others would argue against that. Certainly people that are being oppressed by the system are arguing.
How large were the German and Italian states on the eve of fascism? Upon its election, the Nazi state moved the German government away from transparency, including fiscal transparency. And there are reasons to doubt the strict veracity of German governmental economic statistics dating back as far as the 1920s. I think that's interesting. In a chapter on lessons from American founding by K.S. Sunstein, He says, the unexpectedly powerful presidency it is the rise of an immensely powerful presidency, the growth of national security administrative apparatus that have raised the most serious questions about these plans. So I thought this book was pretty interesting.
Well, we certainly have the incipient developments of it, the beginnings.
Yeah.
And certainly from the bully pulpit, so to speak, of the White House. It's incredible intolerance, and yet it's simply in support for things that do lead to violence.
Here's an interesting chapter on It Can't Happen Here by Noel Feldman. What is it that cannot happen? Authoritarianism, extra-constitutional government. Secondly, is can a statement of probabilities or some absolute condition of possibility? Third, what would count as happening? So this chapter is structured by these clusters of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an interesting chapter. Authoritarianism is not momentary madness. But internal dynamic within liberal democracies, Karen Steiner, Jonathan Haidt, says Western liberal democracy seems to be in the grip of momentary madness, or so the story goes. There are calls to ban immigration, to deport illegals, and to abandon asylum obligations. Boy, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, sure. It's getting more heated, but at the same time, it seems to be a kind of purposeful distraction. Make the announcements even more outrageous each day while dismantling some of the safeguards we have about oppression.
Here's an interesting question. Authoritarianism is different from conservatism. Candidates designate for what right wing. The latter is a largely content-free self-placement whose meaning is inconsistent across cultures and times.
Because of the importance of this
To put out that immigration policy and democratic discourse. Immigration policy is the flashpoint for populism and offers a critical starting point for any new efforts in civil peace. I mean, interesting thing. How Democracies Perish by Stephen Holmes.
Which ones does he use as examples?
Well, they cite Woody Guthrie, who said they say America first, but they mean America next.
Yeah.
The populist rhetoric being directed these days at political vulnerable universities speaks against majority resort to the word academic. Yet the currently believed state of liberal democracy is definitely not an academic subject, at least not only an academic subject. It is also an existential one, involving some of the most dismaying and unnerving trends of our time, with potentially ominous consequences for personal and collective lives.
I hope so. You know, it's interesting. It didn't happen like Harry Potter happened. And when Harry Potter came out, it was a race for pretty much every kid or every librarian in the country to read it. I mean, they had races to read the book. You know, who can get it finished? 750 pages. Or Game of Thrones, same reading frenzy.
Well, and this represented a 22-month investigation.
Indeed, right.
And it's very complex.
It also lays the arguments out in the pages of, oops, you must attack. In the pages that I did read, they're very logically laid out and exactly as you might think. It's actually a pretty fascinating story. You can follow the actions of individual people, what they did, what they said. Guthrie, about his song, This Land, it's my land, this land is your land. But actually, this land was made for you and me was actually a question. So in the last couple of verses, he was pointing out the haves and the have-nots, the consolidation of wealth. I mean, this is all behind the song. But it was the last verse was kind of like, and I've been wondering if this land is made for you and me. And it's a question, which I hadn't really thought about or dwelled on or caught. I never really picked up on that. But the last verse is really about if it is for you and me.
This book is Winners Take All, the Elite Charade, Changing the World. It's written by non-German Herodotus, author of the True American Indian Calling. He teaches journalism at New York University. And what he's talking about is, in it, the groundbreaking investigation of how the global elite's efforts to change the world, preserve the status quo, and obscure their roles in causing the problems they later seek to solve. Isn't that interesting? The wealthy targets of growing populist scorn talk often of fixing society. They're quiet about their involvement in what's broken. This takes us into the inner sanctums of a new gilded age where the rich and powerful fight for equality and justice any way they can, except ways that threaten the social order and their position atop it. In that last tax cut, Trump managed to get a tax cut to benefit the top 1%. So I found that interesting. He says, all around us in America is the clank, clank, clank of the new, but these novelties have failed to translate into broadly shared progress and the betterment of our overall civilization. American scientists make the most important discoveries in medicine and genetics and publish more biomedical research than any other country, but the average American's health remains worse and slower improving than that appears in other rich countries. And in certain years, life expectancy aspects of absolute declines. So I found that really fascinating. This book offers a series of portraits of this elite-led, market-friendly, winner-safe social change.
Winter safe.
In these pages, you'll meet people who ardently believe in this form of change, and people are beginning to question it. He said, "It's my hope in writing this that what follows to reveal these myths to be exactly that. Much of what appears to be reform in our time is, in fact, the defense of stasis. When we see through the myths that foster this misperception, the path to genuine change will come into view. It will once again be possible to improve the world without permission slips from the powerful."
Winners take all.
Another book that we had, Cass Sunstein, he wrote a book on impeachment, The Citizen's Guide. As Benjamin Franklin famously put it, Americans have a republic if we can keep it. Preserving the Constitution and the democratic system it supports. It's the public's responsibility. One route the Constitution provides for discharging their duty, a route rarely traveled, is impeachment. That's what this book explores. So, what's interesting to me is that people are relatively unaware of what impeachment entails. Here's an interesting point. It's an old story and probably true. When the authors of the new American Constitution declared, after the months of work in Philadelphia, that they had finally reached a consensus, one Mrs. Powell shouted a question to the revered Benjamin Franklin, then 81 years old. "Dr. Franklin, what have you given us, a monarchy or a republic?" He gave this answer: "A republic, if you can keep it." With these words, Franklin deflected the thrust of the question. True, he didn't answer a republic, he said, in a monarchy. But in his view, the question wasn't what the framers, a band of good and great men, had given the people. The Constitution's not a gift. The question was, what we the people should do with the framework the framers had produced. And that's exactly what we're struggling with this week.
Well, we have a president of a republic, and the president would rather be a king and make decisions based on his own whims.
Franklin, Hamilton, and their colleagues thought a lot about impeachment. In their view, the power to impeach was central to the establishment of good government from reflection and choice. Without the power to impeach, we, the people, would probably have refused to ratify the Constitution in the first place. Impeachment lay at the core of the founders' intricate and majestic effort to balance the defining Republican commitments to liberty, equality, and self-rule with a belief in strong, energetic national government. They achieved that balance with the diverse features of the Constitution, including a 4-year term for the president, electoral control, separation of powers, and a system of individual rights. And it says, It is ironic that impeachment regarded in 1787 as an essential component of the balance is now little understood by the people of this country, and I think that is also true.
Well, where do you stand on impeachment? Do you think of it as a strategic application of the law to say, well, it might be too soon, it would be better to have a full election and a sound defeat of Trump and the Republicans? Or do you feel like he has created crimes and misdemeanors, engaged in crimes and misdemeanors, and therefore he should be impeached now, or impeachment should be undertaken because that's the way that the Constitution is structured? You can't necessarily play with this kind of political strategy.
Well, I think it's a necessary element of this kind of government. Something has to balance it out. Otherwise, you get presidents like Trump. And I don't know, I'm torn between the Nancy Pelosi version of having it work itself out by doing the investigation and the need to stop Trump from doing what he's doing, which is taking full advantage. He says, I was no expert on the legal intricacies and I decided to get up to speed on the herd. I read everything I could on the subject, old books, new books, primary sources. To my amazement, and through some twist of fate, I ended up as an active participant in the Clinton proceedings. It's a very complicated situation, but it's a necessary thing. It's not something you can take to track. You can't be neutral.
I'm kind of of the opinion that impeachment is an action that Congress has the right and or obligation to do. And the political strategy of waiting for the election, or if he's unsuccessfully impeached, he would then claim final victory. I don't buy that argument. If people feel like he's, or the office, I should say, is acting improperly, then we should take the action that's there in the Constitution to deal with it.
Well, I think the founders of the country had a specific concern, which is not to allow power to go unchecked.
Unchecked, yeah.
And that's what he's talking about in this book. Should any man be above justice? Well, there's a question for you. Because that's what impeachment does. It brings up the question. What we, the people, heard. See, the difference in the way our founders structured our political system, the people are the primary movers. Nobody else. Otherwise, kings will be kings and princes will be princes.
But it's hard to do that through the way we're represented. Oddly enough, we have this representative process, but the representatives don't necessarily follow suit to what people might ultimately want. If they get voted out, then fine, you could say, well, the people didn't want them in there anymore.
Well,
But-
and the people have to take the responsibility for understanding what's going on. And that takes some real time and effort. And the situation is such that people are doing it. Because it is a lot of time. The last chapter is keeping the republic. And that's the whole thing about what do you have to do to have the republic, the country survive and sustain.
I mean, wouldn't impeachment be a valuable process, even if, as a political strategy, it might not be the wisest thing?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think to show, sort of to demonstrate the process of democracy in a way, to show the process of checks and balances.
He
It
says
should
if
be-
we are going to keep the republic, we need to know it's a fail-safe shield, a sword, or ultimate weapon for self-defense.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a symbol and a reminder of who is really in charge
yeah.
and of where sovereignty resides. As much as any provision of our founding document, it announces that Americans are citizens, not subjects. It connects each and every citizen, wherever your parents or you were born, to concords and battle farmers, and to those difficult, inspired days in the late 1770s, when republicanism was literally on the march. Whenever Americans strike a blow against some form of tyranny, large or small, we are honoring our nation's highest ideals and those who have been willing to live and die for it. Thank you for appearing on my book again.
You're welcome. Glad to talk over these issues. It's more and more critical as we go along, isn't it?
Yeah, and we'll find out next week. If it worked. Okay,
Glad to be here.
thank you.